university should do that.
How about that? What, you mean be nimble and be light-footed and be able to do things and pull back from them?
I think you've just given us like a dictionary definition of what a university is, Dirk.
There we go. You heard it first here.
G'day and welcome to Global Horizons. I'm Rob Malicki. Gee, I'm a little bit hesitant today. Coming to you from Garrigle Land in Sydney.
And g'day, I'm Dirk Mulder, founder and CEO of the Koala News. And I'm coming to you from Sydney as well, but not quite in Gadigal Land. I'm over in Durry country.
And Dirk, at least you can speak cleanly this morning, so I think you're going to do most of the chatting today, which is a good thing.
I don't know, mate. What is it, Wednesday the 4th of June, and I guarantee it's probably about 10 degrees colder out here than what it is where you are, and I'm sitting in my little ice box here, and I'm freezing my little tush off, I'll give you that much. It's cold out west today.
It's funny, actually, for those people who are watching the video of this, you'll see both of us are wearing our winter warmers. And in fact, I was up in Queensland last week doing a bit of work, and I remember getting up in the morning, walking outside, expecting it to be that beautiful, balmy Brisbane midwinter weather, and it was 14 degrees. I'm like, Brisbane, what are you doing to me? This is nuts.
Well, you can't see it, but I actually have my puffer jacket on my chair next door, and I've taken it off just for this podcast.
Very good. Cleaning it up for the audience, that's what we like to see.
Absolutely.
Well, maybe the place to start today is over in the USA. Of course, NAFSA taking place last week, but maybe even the biggest news that sent shockwaves around the world, I think, was around everything that's been going on with Harvard University. Maybe that's a good place for us to start, Dirk.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, as you said, I mean, look, the Harvard stuff actually feels like an eternity ago, and it was only a couple of weeks ago, and it's amazing. I mean, essentially, you know, the US administration had put for the want of a better word, a block on Harvard receiving international students, and if you've seen any of the rhetoric that President Trump has come out with, he's spoken a little bit about Harvard offering remedial subjects to international students, et cetera, et cetera. So the initial, I guess, shock of the announcement was one thing. I think I don't want to say those in the know because that sounds a bit elitist, but you know, when you think about the US and you think about the way that it is structured, one would always think that given that it has probably the most preeminent law school in the entire country, that it would be on the offensive fairly quickly, which it was, and joined probably not so much formally but informally by a number of large universities in the US, and injunction was put in place by the federal court. So for the moment, Harvard's still able to attract international students, but it's certainly not the last of that issue, and certainly the administration has pressed and will continue to press, I think, into this space, which leads into, I guess, then the first announcement, which happened right at the beginning of NAFSA, or should I say the second announcement if you include the Harvard one, whereby there was an announcement from the administration they are going to cease or freeze student interviews for visas, which is a whole different kettle of fish. And when you look at that in entirety and you think about how many students there are that go to the United States every year, and each one of them requires a visa interview, that essentially pauses international student recruitment for the United States. So really interesting. We've got Phil Honeywood on a little bit later, so I'm interested to get Phil's view. Phil was actually in the States last week for NAFSA, so it's going to be interesting to hear his views about what the tenor was like in the room in the conference centre in San Diego, as well as what his colleagues potentially from say the UK and Canada feel about those sorts of things as well. So that was the first one, and then I don't want to say shockingly because I'm not particularly shocked, but then there was an announcement from Marco Rubio, who's the Department of State.
Secretary of State.
Secretary of State, sorry. I stand corrected, you're right.
Minor role.
Very minor role, who made an announcement that the administration was going to start looking at Chinese visas with a view of, and I quote, revoking aggressively, or aggressively revoking those visas. And the word is that has started. So it's certainly turbulent times in the United States, that's for sure.
It must send just a shiver down the spine of every higher educator in the country, pretty much. And it seems to be like that kind of almost bullying tactic, isn't it? It's like you pick a big fish, you really pick on them, and you go hard, and then everybody else just says, "Oh crap, I'm just going to put my head down. I just don't want to even be on the radar right now." And that becomes so dangerous, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean it does. I mean I can't speak for the what might be going through anyone's head at any one point while they're doing this stuff, but it certainly is. If you think about for the want of a better word, free movement of people around the globe. And when I say use the word free, I mean, obviously that isn't free. There's visas involved and, there are restrictions, of course, in place. But I don't think, probably since the last World War? Have we seen a restriction on travel? I mean, maybe in Trump's first term when he looked at, cutting off entries into the United States from a number of countries around the world. We probably haven't seen this kind of, this sort of closed shopness mentality that's currently moving around the United States at the moment. And it's not for me to judge. It's, the United States is the United States. But as, I guess, an Australian who has always looked to the United States as being, for the want of a better word, the beacon of the free world and all of those sorts of things, and a country not dissimilar to Australia that has welcomed migrants from all over the world and has built a fantastic multicultural society, it's definitely a change step, that's for sure.
There's over 1.1 million international students in the US. And if you think just about the economic side of that, here in Australia, we're talking like a fraction of that number, half that kind of number, and we're talking sort of $50 billion industry. So, hundreds of billions of dollars. And US institutions, of course, dramatically more expensive than Australian institutions. So the economic impact of that is going to sting. I was sort of thinking about the higher education landscape in the US, where, of course, you've got the elite prestigious institutions that everyone knows the name of. But you also have, Whoop Whoop North Community College that might be recruiting 100, international students a year, something like that. And it literally, and like they're serving a particular community, it just hurts from top to bottom. Just wonder how long it takes for that economic impact to hit. And the answer is probably pretty fast, really.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
If you're international student weighing your choices about where to go, the US is probably just slipped down the pecking order on your preferences list. And maybe that's a good segue into some of the data that Study Portals has just put out around student interest.
Yeah, absolutely. So interestingly enough, during NAFSA, and NAFSA is probably the time where you start seeing some of these service organisations releasing reports specifically focused on the US market. It's clearly a focal point in the US calendar or the global calendar around the US. And so, Study Portals has released a data report, and this obviously would have been done before any of these announcements or the majority of the data collected, certainly prior to the announcements at NAFSA and most likely prior to the Harvard announcement. But they're releasing that student interest falls in the US to pandemic era lows. So even just, I guess, the tenure coming out of the US has really taken the edge off demand for the United States. And then when you consider, I saw another story the other day about it's no longer the Big Four, it's the Big 10 in terms of destination countries. And that makes a lot of sense. So if you think the United States is probably, down on demand, obviously we're going through our own issues here in Australia. Canada we've spoken extensively about, and the UK as well. You're now looking at a global market opportunity for up-and-coming destination countries to breathe more oxygen and be able to put their own sort of, placard out on the door, really. That's being picked up. We've spoken at large about Germany, and we're going to see large destinations like, I imagine, the UAE, both in terms of Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and other parts of the world picking up a lot of that demand that's not being able to go to countries that traditionally were the Big Four.
It's interesting, isn't it? I remember Rob Lawrence talking about this like a decade ago about the sort of intergenerational effect of international education and how if mum and dad went to a certain place, then kids are likely to go to a certain place too. And so it's almost like we're seeing the wholesale restructuring of international education, perhaps for decades to come. Maybe that's a moment for us to sort of shift more towards the local scene here, because obviously election has passed a couple of weeks ago. We talked about that in the last podcast, but now it seems like the opposition has kind of finally worked out that they're not going to attack each other for foreseeable future and are starting to get their front bench, like shadow ministerial positions together.
Yeah, outside of education, just as a political spectator, hasn't the last couple of weeks just been astounding? I mean, the coalition
show, mate. I think we're allowed to. You're a polite newsman. I'm allowed to call it what it is. It's an absolute show.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. To think that the coalition would actually tear itself apart to the point where they'd walk away from each other and then come back, just shows the policy grounding, I think, that has taken the coalition down a path which clearly the electorate hasn't agreed with. Now we're obviously seeing the public sense of that internal struggle coming to light now. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's been incredible and mostly probably focused around the nuclear debate and the nuclear policy that they had, notwithstanding that there's probably other policies around there as well. But yeah, interesting enough, as you mentioned, if you focus back on international education and education more generally, Sarah Henderson, who obviously was a very outspoken voice through the Senate hearings last year and the Liberal portfolio holder or shadow minister Minister for Education, is no longer in the Shadow Ministry, and she's been replaced by Tasmanian Senator Jonathan, I hope I pronounced this right, Duniam? How would you pronounce that, mate?
Probably Duniam.
Duniam? There you go.
I mean, once again, like, name I've never seen before.
And again, unknown quantity, I probably, as you say to most. I've done my research here and I'm reading from script. But Duniam was first elected to the Senate for Tasmania in 2016. So he's been around for a while. And during the Coalition's last term, he was the Assistant Minister for Forestry and Fisheries, Regional Tourism and Industry Development. Didn't hear much and didn't see him on the TV very much. So it'll be interesting to see whether this 48th Parliament and his Shadow Ministry or new Shadow Ministry portfolio, whether we'll see more of him. And as people who follow education more closely, I dare say that we will. So that's a good thing. Other Shadow Cabinet appointees include Andrew Hastie. Now, Andrew is the member for Canning, and he used to be in the seat next to me when I was in Western Australia. So he's got Home Affairs. We've got Michaela Cash, also from Western Australia. She's got Foreign Affairs. And we've got Kevin Hogan, who's got Trade. It'll be interesting to see as the Coalition rejoins and as they start building some momentum, whether they can step it up in Parliament during question time and in other policy areas to put a bit of pressure on the government, and we'll see what comes about from that.
You know what I'm curious? I'm curious just how much of a role, I mean, obviously a pretty key role, but how important Sarah Henderson was in the debate last year for the opposition to stand against the changes to the ESOS bill and against the caps and the like. I really wonder how much that comes down to an individual standing there being like, no, this is crap policy, we should fight it, or if that was more a strategic decision from that sort of senior leadership of the coalition.
Yeah, look, it'd be fascinating to know. Fascinating. I mean, I don't have a sense of it other than my gut feeling, and I feel like it was more politics than what it was issues. And I think more generally, I think international education has been more politics than real issues for the last 18 months. So I think that's fair to say on both sides of the fence. I think I think it was days before the election where the Liberal Party put out something where, visas were going to go up astronomically again under them, and there were costings that were put out that were just unrealistic, and maybe she bore brunt of that, I'm not sure, but it's what I would say is that unfortunately, and I say this not supporting one party or the other, but I think Parliament operates best when you have two functioning parties, and unfortunately, particularly in the policy space at the moment, the Liberal Party particularly, but also the Coalition more generally, have probably taken their eye off the ball in terms of good policy and have had their eye on the ball on politics more than policy. Let's hope we as, taxpayers, as citizens, as, people who live in this probably, I would argue the best country on earth, that we can stop navel gazing, trying to political point score, and get back to the issues. What's going to set us up for the next 20 years? And it's something that I think as Australians we've always done really, really well, but probably in the last 5 to 10 years we've, the shine or the sharp corner's been taken off of that. And I really hope we can get back to that as Aussies and say, how do we make Australia better than what it has been as we face...
You almost said make Australia great again, didn't you?
I do not admit to that.
Just teasing. Awesome.
You can't afford to miss the Australian International Education Conference happening the 14th to 17th October at the National Convention Centre in Canberra. AIE sees the place to meet over 1,500 international education delegates from Australia and overseas. Build your own learning schedule, gain insights from sector experts, new research findings, and spark ideas at lively discussion sessions. Plus, there's plenty of networking opportunities, from the expo hall to brain dates and social events. Don't miss out. Make sure you're at AIEC 2025. Registration is open now. Learn more at aiec.idp.com.
Since we're talking about changes, we've also had some changes at Universities Australia. Now, of course, these are normal cyclical changes, and for those listeners on the last news podcast, we had Luke Sheehy, the CEO of Unis Australia, in chatting with us. That was a great episode, actually.
Yeah, it really was.
Got heaps of listeners.
Yeah, I mean, such a smart guy, right?
Smart guy, yeah. We're looking forward to having him back at some point in future. But talk us through these updates to the constitution of Unis Australia's board I think
Yeah.
this is good for people to know.
So constitution in terms of the makeup or constituent,
Make up, please. Yeah.
not actually the written constitution of the board. But yeah, look, Griffith University Vice-Chancellor and President Caroline Evans, or Professor Caroline Evans, she's been appointed to the Chair of Universities Australia, so congratulations to her. And obviously a very large shout out to David Lloyd, who has held that mantle for the last 2 years, and he's also been on the board for the last 6 years. I think David's done really, really well under difficult circumstances. Certainly I've enjoyed his National Press Club addresses and the way that he's spoken on behalf of Universities Australia in these times. And again, I would go back and reiterate the fact that international education has probably never been a large part of UA's policy area, and I think we've seen that change under David's leadership. Probably circumstances, have forced that somewhat, but it's great to see UA, stepping up in this space. And again, congratulations to David on a great tenure. Obviously, with the University of Adelaide and University of South Australia coming together, I continue to watch the spaces to where David may land, because I think he's a real asset to Australian education more generally, and let's hope we can hold on to him.
Mate, I'd heard through the grapevine that he wasn't successful in getting the VC position for Adelaide Uni.
I heard, well, and again, this is all scuttlebutt, right? But I heard that
Total speculation, right? For absolute clarity, total speculation.
That neither Vice-Chancellor were going for that role. And so I don't think he didn't get it. I don't think either Vice-Chancellor put their hand up for it. And I think, they wanted a fresh face. So again, David has been at UniSA for eons now. I think he came in, I want to say 2013, 2014. So he's been there for a decade now. And I think he's done a really good job at UniSA. So he will be no doubt in high demand around the globe. Obviously from Ireland originally, from Trinity College Dublin, but he'll be in high demand wherever he puts his hand up. And I really hope, wish him luck for whatever's next.
Yeah, absolutely. So also some changes to the constitution of the board, the makeup of the board, with some new additions. Rufus Black from UTAS, Harleen Haynes, relatively new VC at Curtin, I want to say in the last 2 years. Does that sound right?
Oh, no, she's been there for a while now. She's probably been there, I would say, 3-4 years easily. I think she's coming up to the end of the first term. So, and previously, obviously, chair of the ATN group as well. So she joins the board.
And as does Andrew Parfitt, the VC at UTS, a long-time UTS stalwart who's been there for, God, how long would that be now? He's been in leadership positions at UTS probably for nearly 20 years, I'd say.
Yeah, leadership positions. I mean, he took on the VC-ship when Attila Brungs went over, left UTS and went over to UNSW. Probably, that would also be probably 3 years ago. Yeah, 3 years ago now. But yeah, again, a stalwart at UTS. So, yep.
Yeah, awesome. And then obviously a number of continuing board members there too. When UNSW announced that they're ditching the trimester system, they're going back to a more traditional way of teaching, or they're kind of saying it's going back to more of a hybrid way of teaching, but I think it's just kind of stepping backwards. Any thoughts about that?
No, not really, mate. I think that what we've seen over the last 10 years is institutions move between trimesters and, again, probably a more, when I say semester model, it also includes like a summer term or something like that. But we've seen institutions move in and out of this space, and it's always been one that perplexes me. And I get the economic kind of decision of it, in that you can put more students through in a trimester model and you utilise your resources more effectively. But it's interesting, and I think you make a really good point about those moving back to a more traditional model and the rationale that underpins that. It's a space that I probably don't know enough about to be able to comment on, deeply, but I think it's a fascinating space, and it's one that you rightly bring up.
The thing I just was reflecting on recently was, I just love the fact that they tried something. Okay, hasn't worked out. They've decided it hasn't worked out for whatever reasons, and they'd have plenty of data behind what hasn't worked, and have put their hand up and said, yep, okay, didn't work, we're changing it up again. And I applaud those kind of institutions, and to be honest, that's par for a course for Attila Brungs, like, super good leader. He's one of the VCs that I've greatly admired over the last couple of decades. I've been in higher ed, so I felt that was like spot on in terms of a decision. So good on for trying something new, not working out, and then moving on and trying something else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uni should do that.
How about that? What you mean, be nimble and be light-footed and be able to do things and pull back from them?
I think you've just given us like a dictionary definition of what a university is, Dirk.
There we go. You heard it first here. Mate, before we bring in our guest, one story that it's a continuation of a story, but it's one that I've been following carefully, and that's the Australian move into TNE in India. And so I got a media release during the week. It was really lovely to see, because Deakin University has announced that they've placed their first group of interns out of their new programs being offered in India into the National Australia Bank's Innovation Centre in India. So there's actually, I think it's 9 students out of those programs that are actually now receiving paid internships via the NAB Innovation Centre in India. And I say this, I don't know, some listeners might say, it's not really newsworthy, it's a small cohort. But I think it's a really important step in grounding and in the development and the life cycle of a new T&E program. So, we covered this probably 12, 18 months ago where, the announcement was made. Deakin was going to be the first university, to open up in India, in Gift City, under the new arrangements. And we saw the campus open and we saw the first cohort come in. And now we're seeing the first cohort that are actually studying and they're actually now getting internships. So congratulations to Deakin, congratulations to the students, congratulations to the National Australia Bank Innovation Centre for taking them on. And, this is one of those stories that I really hope that we can talk more about, not necessarily just Deakin, but the evolution of Australian education offshore and some of the measures that are being taken as we take that journey between now and wherever the future may take us. It's these steps that we need, I think, to pause and we need to celebrate and we need to say that's awesome and we need to see those develop further, both in terms of depth, so whatever Deakin's next steps may be, but also in terms of width, in terms of other institutions following suit and getting, that praxis that we often talk about, that theory and the practical, getting that moving in a larger way. And, to see the first institution do this is fantastic.
Totally agree, mate. I think Deakin's been absolutely crushing it with what they're doing over there in India. So a great example for other institutions to hopefully use as a great model into the future. And maybe on that point, now's a good time for us to bring in our guest. What do you reckon?
Sounds good. Let's welcome Phil Honeywood, the International Education Association Chief Executive Officer. Welcome, Phil. Phil, you've just returned from the United States. Rob and I quickly chatted earlier and we're looking forward to your comments about what's been going on there. But just as background, obviously what feels like an eternity ago, there was an announcement around Harvard University and then being, pushed out of being able to accept international students. That's obviously gone before the courts and there's an injunction in place at the moment, but that continues. But last week while you're at NAFSA, there were a couple of really interesting announcements. Obviously, them is freezing student visa interviews and then the revocation or revoking of Chinese student visas. Given that you were there last week, what's your take? What was the feeling at NAFSA and what's your take on what's going on in the US at the moment?
Yeah, look, thanks, guys, and really good to join you again. Normally, NAFSA gets around 12,000 attendees. They only got 8,000 this time around, and 45% of them were from overseas. So, proportionately, a lot more from, obviously, other countries, keen to sort of work out what's going on. But amongst the Americans, it was just really shocking morale. We have to go back to Trump's first term when, of course, he didn't like Muslim-majority country students. He didn't like Latin American students and made that very obvious with student visa outcomes. And all the NAFSA people back then were wearing "You are welcome here" badges to sort of highlight that some Americans were actually welcoming students from whatever country. This time around, it was like he was in the room, but he wasn't in the room. You know what I mean? Everybody was talking about challenges, about how to get around these issues that America was facing in the international education sector. His name was never mentioned. That was kind of quite strange, even on the 2 days when he was making these announcements that were just so detrimental to the international education sector. And on the one hand, you feel incredibly sorry for your friends, your peers in America. On the other hand, of course, you're thinking, well, there by the grace of God go we. And then, of course, where are these students going to go instead? Because, as you know, as I caught up with my Canadian and my UK counterparts, they've got their own problems. Yeah. And normally Australia, we think, we'll be able to improve our market share. Unfortunate consequence of what's happening in America. It is interesting, though. I've just addressed our marketing and recruitment network forum here in Sydney, and I made the point that a lot of sponsored scholarship students from Indonesia, from right across Southeast Asia, from China in particular, see America's number one. After all, President Xi Jinping's daughter went to Harvard. I think what's interesting there is I'm already hearing from the folk at our marketing network forum here in Sydney today that the Indonesian government are making overtures to Australian universities saying, look, we are keen now to redirect scholarship students, sponsored students to Australia. So I have to remind people that, of course, those categories are outside of our own enrolment caps. So maybe there's some light at the end of the tunnel in that regard. And obviously the T&E has probably got more encouragement for Australia, again, if countries that have traditionally sent to the US or had hosted US universities are now starting to see, well, we've got to look at other options. So there's some market advantage for Australia, but over there I was more concerned to give empathy to our American colleagues.
And on that, particularly around the freezing of the student visa interviews, have you heard much from Australian institutions about Australian students wanting to go to the US and what might be happening on that front?
Look, not yet. I was talking to Sarah Lightfoot, one of our board members, a moment ago. This is too early yet. The official line out of the American Embassy, I noticed last week, was they haven't stopped student interviews. Well, I mean, the official line out of the Trump administration is they have. So I don't know, a bit of public relations on the part of our embassy in Canberra, their embassy in Canberra. But the rubber's going to hit the road soon because talk to a Gen Z or whatever young person about their social media being inspected by mum and dad and they go berserk, let alone the third power, looking at their phone. And we've got to go right back to World War I and World War II and this sort of stuff, the Cold War, when this type of invasion of privacy was contemplated by any administration.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? I did see on LinkedIn one of our colleagues from Learning Abroad going into the US and he was saying, look, for those of you traveling to NAFSA, I've just literally had my best ever transit through LAX.
Yeah.
Is that terrible? Like the welcome was so friendly. So it kind of feels like it becomes that lottery dip between people who really want to welcome and the others who want to really stick to whatever rules are written or unwritten.
Yeah, no, look, I've got to say after my mandatory 8-hour technical delay in my Qantas flight, my entry eventually into LA was okay too. After this podcast, guys, I might not be able to go back there. That's okay.
I think we're all treading a little bit carefully with what we say. Since we last spoke with you, Phil, the election has come and gone, and obviously massive results for the Australian Labor Party at federal level. From your perspective, how are things shaping up in these early days post-election?
Look, I've called it the least worst outcome. We all know what the worst outcome was going to be. And maybe I was thinking perhaps a minority Greens Labor government, if that had come to pass, might have worked okay if the Greens, Senator Faruqi had shown the most sort of support for us during those Senate hearings other than Julian Hill. But the way it's worked out, I think it's actually the best outcome because we've got a whole range of ministers who don't have to be educated. They can hit the ground running. And in the case of Jason Clare and Julian Hill, they already have. So it's great not to have to train up new ministers. I mean, since I started IEAA in 2011, I've gone through half a dozen education ministers. You can spend the best part of the year making them understand what some of our acronyms are in our sector, let alone make any policy reform. So I met with Jason Clare and Julian Hill. Big shout out to Julian for getting that title of Assistant International Engagement and stuff. Met with him in Jason's office 2 weeks ago. I've got another meeting with them this Friday. This time it's going to be with the National Council for International Education. Pretty soon after the election, they've already got the National Council meeting. And, some of the three key issues that I'm raising in the agenda this Friday won't be a surprise to anybody on the call today. Obviously, quick action on the student visa to bring it down to $1,000 from $2,000 per under 12-month, ELICOS and learning abroad as well. And quite rightly, 2 weeks ago, Jason Clare said to me, well, Phil, you're going to have to provide another bucket of money because everything else has been locked into forward expenditure. With a lot of help from my board, particularly Mike Ferguson and John Chu. We've chewed over a few options. And we've one of them, by example, we put to the ministers maybe looking at the opposition policy, dare I say, that was going to charge a $2,500 transfer fee for an international student who jumped providers. And $2,500 might seem a bit rich, but I think that would also act as a disincentive for the poaching. And the $2,500, we've kind of guesstimated that might bring in about $70 million a year, which we're thinking might be enough to offset discounting of the $2,000 visa down to $1,000. Quite rightly, the two ministers said, well, if we do anything, that won't happen to 1 January. So in the meantime, our sector's got to put up with the 1 July hit with the visas increasing to $2,000. So that's one item. The other item, obviously, on Friday, we're going to talk about the ESOS integrity measures going forward. I don't think they're going to put the enrolment caps back in the legislation. I think they've worked out how to do it to us by other means. So I think we'd all agree that some of those integrity measures are worthwhile, but we want to try and really have a, for example, IEA board wrote to Jason Clare before the election, a long time before the election, asking for the total ban on onshore commissions to be not a total ban, to accept that in some cases there will be legitimate reasons as to why a student needs to change course or whatever. And there's a legitimate role for quality agents to play in onshore commission. It's just how you get the formula to differentiate quality from the usual problems we have. that's going to be the challenge there. So ESOP's integrity. And then the third one, of course, is really urgent. Get that 2026 number out to providers ASAP. They've got financial decisions to make. They need clarity. We know the number's 270,000 new commencements. Whether they change the algorithms or the methodology, there's kind of a view that some of the good quality independent providers who tried to improve their provider risk rating before the caps came in were kind of penalised compared to others that just kept recruiting from the usual markets without worrying about their risk rating. And ironically, some of the best quality ones got the lowest enrolment limits compared to others. So there's a bit of a view, I can't identify where it's come from, but at a high level, there's a view that maybe the algorithm might need to be changed.
Well, that's certainly positive. Interesting with the visa fees. I mean, my comment would be, I hope the LA cost sector can hold on until 1 January. That's the biggest thing. That really, the people that I'm speaking with out there are really on their knees at the moment, backs up against the wall. They're cash strapped. Yep. They're overdrawn, and that this next 6 months is going to be a really big time for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've just seen the release of a number of public university financial audits, financial statements, and a mixed perspective as well from the public universities.
Bit of a sea of red ink from what we've seen from some of the data. It's not looking pretty out there for a lot of institutions.
Yeah, I think it's important to do a reality check here and remember that it's unlikely any government's going to allow a public university to fail. It's just that they can fail in other ways. They can fail in student services. They can fail in, as we know, in cutting all the wrong staff that they should really keep on. So they won't fail and go bankrupt, but there's other measures of failure that we've seen before, unfortunately, in our sector.
Something that we've talked about on this podcast, it's like when times get tough, institutions just retreat, back into their core areas, essentially.
Yeah.
Because they have to. They have less scope to be able to do all of the extra stuff that we know really makes a difference, not only to the lives of students, but to their employability, to their future prospects.
There's a great statement by a speaker this morning at the Marketing Recruitment IEAA Forum that we're all in the storm together, but we're all equally in different boats. And it's sort of how you navigate your own boat by your institution to see how you come out the other end of that storm. And
IEAA had was that last week? Was that last Friday? You guys did the post-election wrap-up? Was it?
Yeah, the webinar. Yeah, no, look, it was great to have Julian.
That was great.
Yeah, I mean, just unfortunate that, Marty Watson, our facilitator, who would have thought that a hotel room in Hong Kong wouldn't have good Wi-Fi, so that wasn't good. And then, even though we tested it beforehand, and then Julian flying into Canberra from Sydney, flight was delayed 2 hours, and he calmly ran from the tarmac with his bag, the propeller aircraft, and got to the lounge in time to give us 15 minutes at the end. So.
It was really great. So for those people who are listening or watching along, if you are an IEAA member, I'd go back and watch that if you didn't get a chance to participate live, because that was really a fantastic summary post-election and some of the things that are heading our way. So once again, I mean, amazing job from the association to sort of be doing the advocacy work that you do.
No, thanks for that. I mean, we've got our federal election platform. We got out some months before the election, and that's got 18 calls to action. I've nominated a few of them. I think it's really important too to mention the great work that the Koala's done with the round tables, and obviously fed back to Dirk, I guess, my sort of initial perspective on how the round table feedback could go forward. It's just one, I guess, area that Dirk and I have discussed over the years, and that's the role of the National Council. And it's a really hard one for me to talk about because we've got the first post-election council meeting this Friday. I'm in Jason Clare's office doing it. And I've just got to reiterate that we are appointed as individuals. We're not appointed to represent peak bodies. No education minister, coalition or Labor, has wanted to have a conga line of peak bodies, as much as I love my peer group. So we've got 3 vacancies at the moment. They'll all be filled by female representatives, I understand. You can count on a new TAFE person. You can count on at least another PVCI or DVCI, probably, and obviously a student. I predict that the international student rep will be probably appointed for a duration until such time as there's a new Council of International Student Association founded. I don't like the idea of ministerial appointment of student voice, but we've got to have one. And it's just a reality that we don't have an international student association anymore. And it's the only ex officio position on the council, and I think it's one we need to really fight to keep. So, we'll have 3 new council members fairly soon. Happily, Jason Clare's agreed, Cabinet Minister, to keep the chairmanship. There was a view, perhaps, that it should go to Julian, but Julian's been quite good about saying, no, we need a Cabinet Minister. So Jason Clare will continue in that role as chairman of the council, and Julian will also be on it, as will Simon, Phil and I continue to be co-conveners, as I understand.
It's a really interesting point you bring about the student voice, and that's one of the things that did come quite loudly out of the roundtables at the Koala. Yeah. Do you have a sense on if the council will be up and what sort of model that might take? Or one of the things that really came out of the feedback, particularly the face-to-face forums, was having a structure that can, for the want of a better word, fly through the storm. And obviously the former CISA council kind of went under during COVID times, but having a secretariat behind it, so there's some consistency and there's some longevity to it, which I think makes a lot of sense. Whether that's being talked about at the highest levels or not, I'm not sure. But
look, the problem with the conundrum we've got is that government does not want to fund an international student organisation based on history. What happened before was that previous federal governments used to give a block grant to CISA, or they'd do it on the basis of projects. Yeah, I mean, CISA would have to put up a project of quite a large magnitude, and they would be given a grant. Unfortunately, every time the Department of Education requested audited account, nothing was forthcoming. It got so bad that the whole national executive of that council of international students would often roll over every year, and there was no institutional memory. And we did have a real strong attempt to have a secretariat, to your point, Dirk. In fact, the students selected HES, which is a subsidiary of UA, and the funding came from a range of stakeholders funded that, including IEAA. But unfortunately, HES said basically we find it really impossible to work with CISA, and they pretty much didn't walk away from the contract, but they just felt that it wasn't worth their time, given the money that we could pay them from a fund we set up called the Sustainability Fund. It wasn't worth their time doing it.
Well, fingers crossed we can find a home for them, because I think their contributions in terms of voice and direction and say is really, really important.
Absolutely.
But addressing that longevity is equally as important.
Absolutely.
As our audited accounts, as we all know.
Yeah. What will we do without accountants and auditors? Yeah.
Absolutely.
I just got an hour-long call with our accountants earlier from earlier today. I love our guys. They're absolutely amazing. I'm so grateful to have them, because, God, I had to do that day in, day out. Respect the accountants out there.
Yeah, would you want to be in their place? No.
Not quite. Okay, awesome. Maybe by way of wrapping up, Phil, anything else that you'd like to share? Anything else coming up that top of mind for you?
Well, at the end of the day, working for a not-for-profit association, every now and then we have to have a strategic plan. So, just as I love working through audit accounts, I really love every 3 years working on a strategic plan, particularly when you've got 13 volunteer board members who've got a range of priorities, shall we say, and coalescing those priorities into a plan to take us forward can be a lot of, fun's the right word, but we'll get there. So yeah, look, we've based the proposed strategic plan on all the feedback that we got, just like the Koala had the roundtables, feedback we got from a member survey. And at the moment, we're anticipating releasing that new 3-year strategic plan in August. So wish me luck.
Something to look forward to. We'll look forward to reporting on it.
Good.
Excellent. Well, that concludes the podcast for today. Phil, thanks again for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you on the podcast. And for those of you listening along, of course, thekoalanews.com is your place for all your international education news day to day. And since we've got Phil here, if you're not a member of the IEAA, that is absolutely worth an investment. I run a small organisation, but I joined as a personal member because it just delivers me so much value year in, year out. So make sure you get on that, IEAA.org. Gentlemen, thanks for the chat today, and we'll see you in the next podcast.
Thank you for the free ad, Rob, and Dirk.
Of course.
See you later.
See you later.
Thanks, Eric.
If you've enjoyed this episode of the Global Horizons podcast, consider subscribing to our newsletter. Search for Global Horizons podcast and then just pop in your email address, and that way you will never miss out on all the critical international education news that you need to stay up to date with. This episode has been produced on Garrigal Land in Sydney. Our video and audio editor is Len Zamora, and I'm your host, Rob Malicki. Have an awesome day. See you in the next episode.